It is my honor and privilege to present to you Allan Savory.
Thanks, Susie. Thank you. All right, thank you for the honor of coming and talking to you, which I really appreciate. I'm going to cover some very depressing stuff, but this is not a doomsday talk. This is a talk of great hope, I believe, for the first time in centuries. We never could have talked with so much hope as we can today. We are facing grave dangers. Let me just express them as global desertification and climate change. These are the grave dangers we face. They are worse than all the wars ever fought. This, as I've tried to express it, is the last war we're going to fight. The war to learn to live with ourselves and our environment in harmony. We lose this one, we're gone. The planet will continue. It is just us and higher life forms that will be gone. So it is desperately serious. There are many symptoms of this that are being dealt with as problems today. Mounting floods and droughts, poverty, violence, immigration, abuse of women and children, emigration across borders to countries, changing the political face of Europe and of America. All of these are symptoms, and people are trying to deal with them. Now, we're going to use a lot of common sense tonight. We're going to use nothing but common sense and good science and what history teaches us. I'm not going to give you anything that comes from me. I'm just going to give you the solid stuff I've been able to put together from what we've learned as humans. Now, one of the common sense things we know is this: if we're trying to deal with a problem and we do not address the cause of the problem, we are doomed. Does anybody disagree with that? Okay, every human knows that. If somebody's beating me on the head, it's no good taking aspirin. I need to stop them beating me on the head. Okay. Now, every human knows that, but not a single university in the world knows it. So we're going to come down to common sense of ordinary people. So we know what is causing climate change, so thankfully we can do something about it. We have Nobel laureates, we have some of the most brilliant minds that have ever existed living today, and they've told us what is causing it. Everybody believes this. It is being caused by livestock, coal, and oil. So we have total certainty as what's causing it. We should be able to get ahead and do something about it. But let's use our common sense. Livestock are going to be needed for centuries to come to produce meat, milk, cheese, wool, hair, hides, etc. They're a resource. Coal and oil are going to be needed for centuries to come to produce plastics and aspirin and many things. There's no way in the world that a resource can cause you problems. A resource cannot cause problems. So here we've got society, and all our leading scientists have got the bull by the udder. All right, so what is causing it then? It is management that has run livestock and managed livestock over 10,000 years. Mob grazing, herding them, moving them, that created the great deserts of antiquity, man-made deserts, turned the Sahara from savanna into desert, where there used to be hippo and giraffe into sand. Right? It is management in the last 100 years that has produced fencing and rotational grazing systems and all the plethora of grazing systems that cause desertification. It is management that has put livestock in CAFOs, force-feeding them grain and polluting the environment. It is not the livestock, it is the management. It is management that took fossil resources and called them fossil fuels to be burnt at a rapid rate. So I think we can say, without any fear of contradiction, with 100% certainty, management is the cause of global desertification and climate change. No scientist in the last 50 years has told me where I'm wrong. Hundreds have shot the messenger. It's time to stop shooting the messenger and look at the message. Now, we discovered this really about 40 years ago, and we discovered that the management that we've always used, humans have always done, there's never been an exception, has been reductionist, and it needs to be holistic. So that's a very simple message. Now, that gives us the first hope in history that we can do something about it, all right? Now, we talk of many, many problems, and we're going to, but we'll keep coming to one theme: what is causing them? Jody and I attended a conference in Norway, in Sweden, I think it was, many years ago, but the Prime Minister of Norway addressed the conference. It was a scientific meeting of some sort, and she addressed us, and she was speaking for the United Nations, and she said, we have all these problems. We get locust outbreaks, we spend millions. We get poverty, we spend millions. We get floods and droughts, we spend millions. And she just named problems all over the place and how many billions are spent or millions are spent. And she said, but everywhere it's going wrong, they go wrong, they're failing. And she appealed to us as scientists and said, can't you scientists see the interconnections? Come up with some solutions. And everybody was nodding their heads. And throughout history, the majority has almost never been right. And when everybody's nodding their heads, I began to think, well, maybe they're not interconnected. And just putting cards on the carpet and playing with them with the different problems and juggling it around and thinking it in my mind, I found they're not interconnected at all. They're all coming from one source, like spokes of a wheel coming from one source. And that source is something we've discovered through my work and hundreds of people that have helped me over the years, not through any wisdom. We discovered it by accident, as so many things have happened in science. We didn't set out to find this cause. We discovered it by accident. And about 1984, we got it. All right, so I like to use the analogy of flying because there's a great similarity. For thousands of years, we did not know how to fly. We had the ambition of flying. Thousands of men died trying to learn how to fly. Jumped off cliffs, waxed wings that melted and whatever. And on a given day, the Wright brothers flew. We could then release human creativity, and within 70 years, we were on the moon. Within 70 years, we were on the moon. I see an exact parallel here. For 50,000 years, we didn't know what was causing desertification. It began 50,000 years ago or more. Just getting worse and worse and worse. And then we had the coal and oil, and then it was accelerated more. We didn't know what was causing it. We know what was causing it. We've just talked about it with 100% certainty. But we knew this 40 years ago. Why didn't we get flying? Why didn't the human spirit fly? We've got to get it flying. We're going to run out of time if we don't get it moving. So I see a great parallel with that. All right, so it was not happening. This is because something was blocking progress. Those of you already involved in holistic management know that we every year look at the whole business and see if something's blocking, totally blocking. It's not hindering, it's not an obstacle, it's blocking. And you don't move further until you undo it. We call it a logjam. There is a logjam that we're up against, and the human spirit cannot fly unless we clear that logjam. Now, I'm going to talk about that logjam, and the only people in the world who can clear that logjam are you, and the people on either side of you, and the people in your families and in your community. It is only lay people who can clear that logjam. No politician can, no university can, nobody else can in the world, and I'm going to explain that to you. All right, so management is the cause, and that's what we've got to deal with. And when I say management, I'm just going to use the word management, but this means of your families, managing your businesses, managing on the farms, the pastoralists, the foresters, the fisheries, everything. Management, it means management at the government level of policies, at the United Nations level of policies, development projects, All of these are management. And I won't keep saying that, I'll just talk about management. All right, so when we humans deal with big things, do we do it as individuals or through organizations? You know, we don't do it through. Do you fight a war individually? No, you fight it through an army. Do you educate all your kids individually, or do you do it at schools and groups and colleges and universities? We form organizations because they're efficient. They're an efficient way of getting things done. We need our organizations, our institutions. They're very, very essential to civilization. And they're formed for good reason, and they're one of the most efficient ways of getting things done. Now, organizations, the moment they are formed, cease to behave like a human. They do not behave like any human being behaves. They take on a life of their own from there on, from the moment you form them, next day. And organizations, when they take on a life of their own, are not even within law treated like a human. So an organization can murder thousands of people and nobody is brought to trial. Nobody is held accountable. At the most, the company may pay a big fine. Would you as an individual, if you murdered somebody, just pay a big fine? You see, we don't hold them accountable. We just slap them on the wrists at the most because they're all our organizations, our institutions. Now, organizations reflect the prevailing view of the society in which they're formed. Organizations lead the way with the prevailing thinking of society. So go into any university, cattlemen's organization, environmental organization, anything, and you'll find them tending to be using the latest computers, the latest software, the latest smartphones. Why? Because society believes in technology. So they'll be doing that. They will award those sort of things. Organizations awarded a woman, very deservedly, I'm not running her down, she got a Nobel Prize for planting trees to deal with climate change. Why? Because society believes in planting trees. You see, they follow the beliefs of society. Now, when organizations develop and take on a life of their own, if you study system science, you'll see that they are self-organizing. If the chairman dies or the whole board dies, the organization doesn't. If they all die in a car crash, you just replace them. The organization continues. It's not like anything we make. If it doesn't run out of fuel, batteries don't go flat. It just keeps going in changed form when it goes. So it's self-organizing. And in system science, anything like that is complex. So institutions, organizations are defined in system science as complex, soft systems. Complex, soft systems. That's all organizations of humans and institutions. And then in nature, everything in nature is a complex system. So you have two complex systems, human organizations and nature, to deal with in management. Now, outside of that, the only systems that we recognize in system science is essentially everything we make. So look at every single thing in this room, from making a toothbrush or a penknife to putting a man on the moon, space exploration vehicles, making electricity from solar or nuclear, any of these things, all right? And they need expertise, they need technology. You can't even make a toothbrush without technology, all right? They need expertise, they need technology, and they're not complex. Nothing we make is complex. They run out of battery, they stop. They run out of fuel, they stop. A part is broken, they stop. They're not self-organizing, all right? They are very complicated. I do not even know how to make a toothbrush. I'm not expert enough, okay? But they're never, ever complex. So the only complex things we deal with are organizations and nature, essentially. All right, so one of the other things science recognizes is that when we have problems with complicated hard systems, that's everything we make, the problems are described as kind. They're kind problems. It doesn't mean they're kind, it just means they're easy to solve. If a rocket misfires, bursts, doesn't go, give us a few $1 million, give us 6 months and we're back on track. Right now, when problems occur in human organizations or nature, they're described as wicked problems. It doesn't mean they're amoral. It just means they're almost impossible to solve. So when we look at wicked problems, for example, desertification, happening for thousands of years, was a wicked problem. It was incapable of solution until we finally solved it with holistic planned grazing. Okay? Up to then, for thousands of years, we couldn't solve that. Climate change is now unsolvable. Wicked problem. Now, how do we deal with that? That's really what I'm talking about tonight. Okay, how are we going to deal with that? Now, when we look at wicked problems of our organizations, there are 3 that are recognized that I've been able to find and read about in the research that are now endangering us, even though we form our organizations for efficiency. One of these is that while our organizations and institutions lead all the time in the prevailing thinking, when new thinking emerges, new science emerges, new scientific insights emerge that are counterintuitive or paradigm shifting, our organizations lead the ridicule, lead the rejection, lead the opposition, and they will go to extreme lengths. And nothing has changed since Galileo. Okay? You know what happened to him. You know what happened to the fellow Harrison that discovered longitude. You know what happened to Semmelweis, who discovered that if he washed his hands after cutting up corpses, he'd save hundreds of women's lives. If he did that before going to the maternity wards, the experts, the institutions of the day, drove him mad. He died in a mental home. Thank God I was insane 50 years ago. That has saved me, because I wouldn't want to go through with you what I've had to put up with for the last 50 years of the persecution, the ridicule, the stuff from institutions. It is the norm. Nobody's being bad. So that is a wicked problem. And it doesn't matter how many facts you produce, how much evidence you produce. It doesn't matter how many millions of lives are lost. It doesn't, none of this matters, all right? Nothing changes. Institutions cannot change. Even if they want to, they cannot change until the public perception changes. When the public perception changes, they can change, and they do, and they always do. But they do not change until the public perception changes. And I cannot find a single case in history where an institution has changed ahead of the public. Cannot find it. That's why not a single cattlemen's organization has ever supported me. They've opposed me. Shouldn't they have been some of the first? Environmental organizations should have been the first to support me. Never have. They've opposed. They're not being bad. It's a wicked problem. Okay? Now, there are 2 other wicked problems that we've got to deal with somehow, and nobody's talking about them. The next one is no matter how good the people, no matter how intelligent the people, it could be us in this room, the most perfect people they've ever been, okay? And you put us in an organization, and how we communicate and how we act because of complexity, all right, and our fear of speaking up, and will it affect my seniority or my promotion, and will it offend so-and-so? What comes out, what emerges very commonly is stupid, lacks common sense, lacks humanity. Now, once you know that, you begin to see it all over from institutions. If you want a really good example that's almost everybody can relate to, ask almost anybody in America, does it make sense for America to produce oil, to grow corn, to produce fuel for vehicles? It's stupid. Why is America doing it? Why have thousands of far more intelligent people than me signed off on that? Because they're institutional scientists. How many have objected? Very, very few. Do you see what I'm talking about? And once you're aware of that, you just see example after example after example of stupidity coming out of brilliant people's minds because of institutional wicked problem. Now there's another one. When institutions, organizations do something wrong, it is extremely rare for them to publicly just say, sorry, we screwed up, let's move on. That is extremely rare. Organizations, because of wicked problems, will circle the wagons, defend the organization, even though their mission is that, they will now circle the wagons and go in this direction, opposite of their mission. If you don't believe that, just think Catholic Church. Brilliant people, wonderful people, millions of them around the world, an ancient organization, all right? They have known about pedophile priests for how many hundreds of years? What did they do? Protected the priests, protected the church, didn't protect the innocent, went against their very mission for hundreds of years. When are they doing something? Now, because of social networking, computers, all the stuff, knowledge getting out, finally enough people in the public know about it and something is beginning to be done. And these are brilliant, wonderful people. These are institutional problems, and no institution escapes them. Okay. Now, because we manage through institutions, and we have to, now let's look at history a little bit. Institutions led us to major blundering, enormous blunders around the world. And it was so bad that in the time of Voltaire, the best minds in the world said, it's got to end. And so we went into the age of reason, or the age of enlightenment. And Voltaire's time, this was done, and Napoleon spread this through Europe more than any other leader. From then on, we were not going to have major blundering, because all our institutions, they reckoned it was happening because of amateurism. Amateur leadership. You could inherit or buy your position in the army or in the organization. So we had amateurs leading them, and we got this terrible blundering. So we're going to end that. From there on, all institutions would be led by highly trained, professional, competent people, as they are today. How many are led by people with PhDs? Whatever. Our institutions. One of the first things they look at is your academic credentials, etc., in selecting. All right, so John Ralston Saul, who wrote Voltaire's Bastards, big 500-page book, bestseller. I've read it 5 or 6 times. I hope you will read it. He did the research. It's exhaustive research across all disciplines that you can imagine, the arts, all sorts of things. And he said, what actually happened? What happened when we started getting expert leadership in our institutions? Did things get better or worse? Which do you think? They got far worse. And he documents it right across the board there, using examples and case study after case study. So when we went to expert leadership, the blundering got worse, and if you want evidence, global climate change. It's just massive global blundering and stupidity of institutions. And nobody's being bad. So we keep blaming greed and all these things. No, it's us. It's us good people doing this. Unintentionally, because we don't understand complexity. So let's get off the blame game and start looking at ourselves and our institutions and trying to understand this. Now, Saul, I'm going to quote him here under the expert leadership. He said, "The reality is that the division of knowledge into feudal fiefdoms of expertise has made general understanding and coordinated action not simply impossible, but despised and distrusted." And that's what you're seeing worldwide. From good people, highly intelligent people, because of wicked problems. Now, those 3 wicked problems, I didn't come up with them. They're not my thinking. This is just what I've gleaned in trying to understand when I'm trying to help the world and we've got some breakthrough and you're doing everything you can. Why are you hitting such logjam? Why such opposition? You start looking at the research, trying to understand, and this is what you begin to turn up. So now I hope you see why the research, the science, and history all inform us why there's no leadership. When people are looking around today, they're looking for leadership from politicians or universities or environmental organizations or whatever. Don't look there. They cannot lead. History shows this, science shows this, the research shows this. Now you should understand why worldwide, and not just in the United States, we're drifting leaderless. We're facing global desertification and climate change, and there's nobody at the helm. There's nobody in charge, there's no leader, and you're not going to get a leader. If you heed the science, heed the research, heed history. So where's the leadership going to come from? You. You are the only leaders that there can be. So don't look at anything except the mirror when you look for leadership. Now you know why there was no movement forward when we discovered 40 years ago how to deal with desertification, which is a major component of climate change. If any of you don't believe in climate change, all right, because you don't believe all this stuff about carbon and fossil fuels, etc., that's okay. But start believing in climate change because of desertification. As I spelt out in the TED Talk, if you make 1 square meter of ground bare, I promise you, and you can test me on this, just put your bare foot on it after midday and see how damned hot it is. And put your bare foot on it at dawn and see how cold it is. It is far hotter, far colder than your lawn or any ground covered with vegetation. Okay? So when you are changing microclimate, by the time you're doing that to over half the United States, the whole of Nevada, Arizona, most of California, etc. Not here, this is too humid. By the time you're doing this over most of the United States, believe me, you're changing macroclimate. And one woman I heard giving a lecture long ago, I loved it. She, Elizabeth Sartoris was her name, and she put up a picture, a slide of the planet from space. And you could see a spacecraft. And she just said, if somebody had been watching our planet over the last 50,000 years, 100,000 years from space, and describing humans, we would be described as a desert-making species. Because the biggest change you can see from space is the expansion of the deserts. In the United States, Australia, Canada, all over the place, expanding, as I talked about in the TED Talk. All right, now, don't look then for leadership from any institution. Now, I wish I was wrong. I wish I was wrong. But not a single scientist have I found, not a single thing have I been able to read that contradicts what I'm saying to you now. I haven't been able to find that. So if you can, please do. So now it's up to us as individuals, families, communities, etc. So if it's up to us, you, me, there's some things we need to know. The first is we need to know the basics of the management options, and then we need to know what we can personally do. So now I want to talk to you about the basic management options we have, if management is the cause of the problem, and then what you can do about it. Now, if you go to had an exchange with somebody on the internet the other day who actually took my daughter to task for saying that there was holistic management and reductionist management, and he was taking her to task and saying if you go to any management library or any library management section, there are dozens of books on management, there are whole universities engaging in it, and so on and so forth. So people believe there are hundreds of ways of managing. You can manage dictatorially, democratically, as a community, and blah, 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 blah. keep peeling the onion, keep peeling the onion, keep peeling the onion, because at the end of the day, in the management, you have to make an action. You have to make a decision. So if we keep peeling the onion, we find, oh, there aren't lots of options. There are only two. There are only two options. Management is reductionist or it's holistic. And there isn't an intermediate. So we've got two options. That's bringing it down. All right, that's going to help. All right, so what is reductionist management then? Let me summarize that. I believe it's genetically embedded in it, because I recognize the same management in an ape, an otter, a vulture, any tool-using animal. So I think it was genetically embedded. Everything we manage is complex. We talked about that earlier. So you cannot manage anything without dealing with complexity. And when we manage to improve our lives. That's why we're managing. When you think about it, you're trying to improve your life in the family, in the business, anything. That's why we do it. And so every management action that we take to improve our lives, we take this web of complexity that we have and we reduce it to meeting a need, meeting a desire, or solving a problem. So you're taking this web of complexity, social, environmental, cultural, everything, and you reduce it to a need, meeting a need, a desire, or solving a problem as the reason or the context for the management action. Try to think of a decision you make in your life, whether it's to make more profit, grow potatoes, run sheep, doesn't matter what it is, that you're not making it to meet a need or a desire. 99.9% of the decisions you make are to meet a need or a desire in management, or to solve a problem. And if it's a government and a government policy, it's to solve a problem. All government policy, the only reason you develop a policy is to address a problem. There's no other reason we develop policies in a government. All right, so we're reducing it even in policy. Now, even if it's the most sophisticated, interdisciplinary scientific team, and they're fully aware that this policy is going to have social repercussions, it's going to have environmental repercussions, it's going to have economic repercussions, that sophisticated team of 100 scientists from all different disciplines will still reduce that complexity to the problem and develop the policy. It's still reductionist. We just cannot escape it. Now, when it comes to dealing with our management with desertification and climate change, we have to use a tool. We do not think of ourselves as a tool-using animal, but we are. We cannot use our creativity to do anything. We cannot use our hands, our labor, to do anything. We cannot use money to do anything until we pick up a tool. You just can't do it. If I want you now to drink water, how are you going to drink water? You can't use technology, it's a tool. How would you drink water? You see, you'd have to go to the nearest river and drink with your hands. To drink. You cannot even drink water without tap, pipe, pump, dam, technology, cup. We are a tool-using animal. Now, just like I talked about management, I found, working with my fellow scientists and so on, trying to work out these problems, that we thought we had thousands of tools. If you saw the TED Talk, that's gone to 5 million people now, offering hope, in it I said we have no option but to use much vilified livestock. Now, I've been criticized heavily by academics and so on. What sort of scientist is that? How can you believe this guy? There's always many options. This guy is stupid. He's a snake oil salesman. Well, am I? What are the options? Let's look at it and peel the onion. We've got the tool of technology. We got it roughly 2 million years ago. Sticks and stones. We could sharpen the sticks. We could chip the stones. We couldn't change our environment any more than any other animal that was tool using. And we went like that for 1 million years, 1.5 million years, whatever it was. We could not advance our technology. Then we got the use of fire, and then we learned to make fire. First animal to learn to make fire. And the world began to change, because one animal now could make fire. And then we could melt the stones and go into the copper, the bronze, the Iron Age, and develop everything we have today, the camera that's being used, the glasses I have, everything in this room, all the clothing you have, every single thing in this room was made possible by fire. I'll bet you cannot name a single thing in this room that wasn't made possible by fire. So for 99.9% of human existence, we had two tools, technology and fire. For the last million years, only two tools. Now, relatively recently, about 10,000 years ago, people developed the idea of another tool. The idea of resting the environment. Probably came from crop farmers trying to rest it, or pastoralists moving their animals. And today we call it rest, conservation, leave it to nature, but resting as a positive tool or idea. So we now have three tools in the human toolbox. That is it. You've got three options. And we've got a modification of that. We can use technology to plant trees, as I mentioned earlier. So you could use technology to plant trees, but you can't plant trees like you can't drink water without using technology. So that's the human toolbox. It's now empty with reductionist management. All right, what is the result of this management? Well, it culminates in global desertification, climate change. In policies, we see it consistently producing unintended consequences. The war on drugs in America, brilliant people putting together the policy for the war on drugs. What has it done? It increased drug use amongst our kids. It spread violence across our borders. It spread violence to North Africa as well. All right, what about the war on weeds? Policy on weeds. We spend $1 billion, not $1 million, $1 billion a year. We've done it for 40 years I've been here, or whatever number of years. Have we killed a single weed species in a single state? No, it's stupid. We've poisoned our water, we've poisoned the environment, we've bankrupted farmers, but we keep doing it. What about the war on terror? How are we doing? Do you want me to go on? Education? Military? Anything. It doesn't matter which policy you look at. They're unsound. They lead to unintended consequences. So common is that economists refer to the law of unintended consequences. It is so common. All right, so that is reductionist management. That is 100% the cause of almost everything that ails us. There's almost no problem being created by nature. Right, so what is holistic management, the other option that we now have? As it exists today, and hopefully it'll be modified and improved as we go in the future, as it is today, we work in whole situations. So we first look at, what are we dealing with? Is it a family? Is it a farm? Is it a school? Is it a business? Is it a university? What is it? Is it a military? Is it a whole government? A whole country? We've just got to get our hands around what are we dealing with, and who are the people who make decisions, who are the people who are very, very vital, but they don't make decisions. We just get this straight in our minds. What money is involved? What resources are involved? Okay, we know what we're managing. So we manage in whole situations. We do not reduce that complexity to meeting needs, desires, and solving problems. We're going to have to do that, but we don't reduce the complexity. So the people involved develop a new idea, a new concept, not in any religion in the world, not in any branch of science in the world, not in any philosophy yet in the world. A totally new concept of developing a holistic context. One context or reason for improving our lives. So that is for those people in that situation, it's how they want their lives to be, based on their spiritual values, their religious beliefs, their whatever it is, their culture, how they want their lives to be, tied to their life-supporting environment in a condition it'll have to be 300, 400 years from now to be sustaining their descendants in that lifestyle. All right, so this is the context or reason now for the management actions or the policy. And then we go about meeting our needs, our desires, solving problems, just as we did. We open our minds to all science, okay? And we try and solve our problems. And then when we're close to agreement, in how we're going to meet our needs, our desires, whatever, we have a set of 7 filtering questions that if there's any doubt of whether this is in context or not, we run it through 7 simple questions that just check that it's socially sound, environmentally sound, economically sound, short and long term, in line with what we want, because we're managing to improve our lives. Now, we add the missing tool. Without adding livestock, I'm sorry, civilization is finished. You're just going to see the dying of civilizations globally now, unless we bring livestock in as a tool, because there's no other tool that can solve the biological problem of desertification and regeneration of the world's soils, etc. Okay, so we bring that in. Now, I want to give you an idea of the context, holistic context. I'm going to read one here. It's what I call a generic one. I have this, I carry it with me. It's pretty well ingrained in my head. And when I'm visiting any country, new culture, anything, I have this in my mind, or I look at it, and I can listen to the news, I can read scientific papers, I can read their policies, I can listen to people talking, and I'm running it through the holistic framework in my mind, and right away I know whether they're likely to succeed, likely to lead to problems. I can begin to assess it, and this is just what most humans would want. So this is a generic example, but in real life you form a real one. So we want stable families living peaceful lives in prosperity and physical security, while free to pursue our own spiritual or religious beliefs, adequate nutritious food and clean water, enjoying good education and health in balanced lives with time for family, friends, and community, and leisure for cultural and other pursuits, all to be ensured for many generations to come on a foundation of regenerating soils and biologically diverse communities on Earth's land and in her rivers, lakes, and oceans. Hold up your hands, anybody wouldn't want a life like that? Almost every human wants that, but we're killing each other in wars because of reductionist management. This is one of the most powerful unifying things I know. And we agree on this when we develop a holistic context. There's no prejudice allowed. Organic agriculture is not allowed in there. That's a prejudice. All right? It's no prejudice against anything. It's 100% what you want, 0% how to get it. No decision already made can be in there. It's going to be the context for all your actions and decisions. And it's 100% agreement, no compromise. If there's any compromise, neither party is happy. So you just keep talking until it's 100% agreement, and now you've got a context for your actions. Okay, so you get the idea of how it goes. All right, so I've pointed out worldwide why we're floundering, why we're leaderless. Now, while our organizations cannot lead, individuals can. And we would hope that individuals with thousands of fans, celebrities, etc., sports, entertainment, would be helping. Tragically, they're not. They want to be popular, they've got thousands of fans, they're jumping on the bandwagon of vilifying livestock. So just Google vegans and vegetarians and celebrities. Hundreds are supporting the vilification of livestock. Why? Because society vilifies livestock. So they're doing that. So that's not helping us. So if we ordinary people then are going to have to do it, not our celebrities, not our institutions, then what are we going to tackle first? We better get prioritized now. What are we going to do? Because it's up to us. The buck stops with us. So what should we address first? Now, I believe it's agriculture that we should address first, because without agriculture, which is not crop production. It's the production of food and fiber from the world's land and waters. So fisheries, wildlife, forestry, all these things are agriculture. Without that, you cannot have a university, you cannot have a church, you cannot have a university, you cannot have an orchestra, you cannot have an army, you cannot have a city. It is the foundation of everything, so that's what we need to do. Now, agriculture, common sense again, should be based on the biological sciences. Because of institutional stupidity, it is based on chemistry and marketing of technology. So agriculture, the whole planet is involved in it now. Only 6% of the planet's surface is cropland. Only 6% of agriculture is cropland. On the land, only 20%. United States figure and also global figure, roughly 20%. The other rest of it is engaged in agriculture. We are killing the oceans, we're polluting them with plastic, we're killing out the species of animals, we are burning billions of hectares of grasslands every year, we're burning millions of hectares of forests periodically, all putting more pollutants and so on in the air than cars. All of this is happening. Agriculture, I can say to you without a shadow of doubt, is the most destructive, extractive industry ever in the history of mankind. No mining, no coal, no oil, anything is doing the damage that agriculture is doing. One statistic is all you need. Soil scientists published papers from the croplands, which is 6% or 20% of the land. They estimate that we're losing over 75 billion tons of dead, eroding soil every year. All right? That's more than 20 times the food we need. Now, if we include the erosion and the dead soil from our national parks, from our forests, from our desertifying land, from all of this other land, these 75 billion tons is probably something like 10 times that, which would make it about 750 billion tons is probably the more realistic figure of that. That is 200 times the food we need for every human alive today. That to me is the most scary, frightening statistic in the world. So that's where we need to start. Now, if we look at development projects, yes, we need to, but you come back to agriculture. The latest 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, formed by brilliant people in institutions, spent millions of dollars, have taken 10 years doing it. I've read them all. I will stand here and guarantee you failure. Why? Because almost all of them are just dealing with the symptoms of desertification. Floods, droughts, poverty, blah, 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 blah. And with those millions of dollars that are going to be spent on those sustainable development goals, there is not one single dollar being spent on the cause. Not $1. So what's the chance of success? It's zero. Now, about every 10 years, we have another Rio or Johannesburg type conference. About 10 years from now, you will have another conference. I won't be with you in all probability, but you'll have another conference and you'll come up with more sustainable development goals. Because it's not dealing with the cause of the problem, which is management. So if we're going to change then, and change our agriculture, we have to get sufficient people in the public concerned to enable our institutions to change. Remember, they cannot change even if they want to. So we have to get the public concerned, insisting that management be holistic, etc., and then they can begin to change agricultural policy. Now, if we focus on agriculture first and desertification, there's a good reason. It's like the low-lying fruit. It's because the grasslands of the world are so deteriorating and so vital to us. So while I believe it is true to say that the oceans are overexploited, I believe it is true to say that the rivers and the lakes and the tropical wet forests are being overexploited. the grasslands of the world, the savannas, the dry deciduous forest, I'm talking of 2/3 roughly of the world, it's the opposite. It's suffering from overrest, underuse, as the main core thing leading to desertification. So the military, the political, the economic significance of what I've just said to you is just mind-boggling. Nobody can grasp it, and they probably won't until years after I'm dead. The significance of what I've just said to you, when we believe the world is overpopulated. So we've got to concentrate on these grasslands of the world if we want to survive. Now, in doing that, what is the sort of agriculture we need? Is it organic? Is it grass-fed? Is it sustainable? You're hearing all of these things: permaculture, biodynamic agriculture, agroforestry. What is it? Is it mainstream, etc.? All of these are being touted by various people. Now, if we tout different practices like this, what happens? I promote one practice, immediately other people promote their practice, immediately we get into discussion and debate, we vie for funds, we vie for validity of our idea, and that is why it takes anywhere up to 100 to 200 years till the public is sufficiently focused and institutions can change. That's what the research shows us. So when the Royal Navy, when it was discovered that just giving lime juice to sailors would stop scurvy, they argued, they discussed, etc., etc. That took 200 years. 1 million sailors died. The importance to Britain was vital. It didn't matter how many sailors died. It didn't matter how vital it was to the survival of the nation. It took 200 years. And when the Royal Navy accepted it, it took a further 70 years till the Merchant Navy accepted it. I talked about the Catholic Church, and 200 years at least that they've known about paedophile priests. Okay, it takes a long time. So if we keep promoting individual practices, we can guarantee, if we heed history, science, and research, that we will not have our institutions change for roughly 100 to 200 years. Do you think you've got the time? I know we haven't got the time. We're running out of time. So what sort of agriculture? We cannot afford these individual practices. We've got to focus somehow. So what we need is not organic, grass-fed, any of these things. I support those 100%, but think deeply. Prior to using coal and oil, all agriculture was organic. The agriculture that made civilization possible was 100% organic. All livestock was grass-fed. That destroyed more than 20 civilizations around the world. The only places we could sustain civilizations for a relatively long time was rivers and seashores. What did it take to sustain London? It took a Royal Navy, a Merchant Navy, most of India, much of Africa, most of North America. It took a whole enormous chunk of the world to maintain that for 4,000 years, or 2,000 years, or whatever it is too now. The only place we have sustained civilization for a long time, 10,000 years, is Lower Egypt. What did it take to sustain Lower Egypt? It took the destruction of the Sudan, the destruction of Ethiopia, to bring that silt down the river every year. Armies change civilizations. We farmers destroy them. They never rise again. And now we're doing it globally. We've done it regionally with organic and grass-fed. Now we're doing it globally. Is that what you really want? No. So we've got to get beyond that and talk about regenerative agriculture. Now, I credit Bob Rodale with this because Bob was the first guy I heard in 1980 when I was talking to him saying, Alan, we need a regenerative agriculture that's not sustaining the mess we have, that's regenerating communities, regenerating the economy, regenerating the soil, the environment, and regenerative is what we need. All right, so we're going to need a regenerative agriculture if we're going to tackle agriculture, which is the biggest single thing and danger we face, bigger than coal and oil, etc. All right? And we're going to have to, as a public, just families and public, keep talking and demanding that agriculture be holistic and become regenerative until institutions can change. So now, what is regenerative agriculture? What does it look like? How do we describe it? How do we define it? If we're not careful, it'll just be another case of it becoming a cliche, greenwashing, and institutions running with it and endangering mankind. So we better be pretty clear about what this new agriculture is. Agriculture will be regenerative when the management is holistic. On our farms, in our ranches, our pastoral communities, our policies, etc. When all policy is developed this way, or a better process. We have the holistic framework of today that we've had for developing for the last 60 years, and it should keep developing, so something better. In every case, as soon as people do not reduce the complexity to simply meeting needs, desires, etc., the right practices will float to the top. So whether it's organic or mainstream or whatever, the moment you're making decisions holistically, the right thing will float to the top. Earlier, I heard one of your panel talking about best management practices. It's actually an oxymoron. There's no such thing as a best management practice. What might be a right practice this year on the farm might not be the right practice next year. It's total nonsense, all right? What you need is the best practice for you right now to float to the top. And it does the moment you manage holistically. So this would mean all the best of the present practices, whether they're agroforestry or permaculture or organic, biodynamic, any of these, and some elements from mainstream agriculture. It's not all bad. There'll be some elements of that that'll rise to the top in the new agriculture. So we do not define and cannot define regenerative agriculture in terms of any specific agricultural practices. We can only say it is managed holistically, embracing the most recent science as we go, and the best of our practices that float to the top when we do not reduce the complexity, as I said. Now, if you go beyond that and try to define agriculture as organic or sustainable or any of these things, it's like the question, how long is a piece of string? If any of you ask me, how long is a piece of string, I look stupid because I can't tell you. I have no idea how long a piece of string is. But if you give me the specific context, and a specific piece of string, I can tell you it's exactly 1 foot or 2 foot, and precisely and exactly. It's the same with management. You can't define how long a piece of string is, but the moment you have a piece of string, you know it for certain. And regenerative agriculture is going to be like that. You can't define what practices the man is doing or the woman is doing on the farm, but they'll be the right practices. They'll be socially sound, environmentally sound, economically sound because of the management. And they'll be the latest in science and what we know. I hope you get that point because it's critical. What I like, one of the things I like most, is that there'll be great harmony in place of today's conflicts. And that is because of the point I mentioned to you earlier, that when we do manage holistically, we begin with a holistic context. Because that harmony is so important, I'm going to digress for a moment to tell you of a case we had. There was a time when I trained about 2,000 people for USDA in the early 1980s, and one group that came for training were dealing with a wildlife refuge, La Creek, and I think it was up in Nebraska way, and they wanted to start managing holistically. There was great conflict in the area between farmers, ranchers, townspeople, environmentalists, etc. And it was about the time of the Timothy McVeigh Oklahoma bombing, if you remember it, and the many attempts at government officers after it, lots of anger in the country. Anyway, they asked if I would help them, and I said, yes, I will. And I said, just get the people together to meet with me and we'll get it started. And they agreed on that, set a date, and they asked me to send them an agenda for the meeting. And I actually took a blank sheet of paper, nothing on it, put it in an envelope and posted it to them. It was before we had all the internet stuff. And they phoned me and said, what the hell, it's a blank piece of paper. And I said, that's it. The solution can never come from an outsider. It's got to come from you, the people in the community. It's got to be their solution. Just get them together. When I got there, I saw all men with pickups outside and in clusters, big buckles, big hats, big boots, the usual garbage, and no women, no children. And I said to the officials I was with, what the hell gives? Aren't there any women? Aren't there any children in this community? And they said, none have come to the meeting because it could get violent. So only the men have come to the meeting. All right, so I went in, I had all these men facing me. Now, I explained to them holistic management. I said, we need one context, a complete agreement on it in your community. And they just ridiculed me. They shouted at me. They told me to F off back to Africa, that I didn't have a clue what I was talking about. I didn't know their community. It was impossible to have agreement. And I said, gentlemen, time out. I agree with you. I don't have to live with you. I don't have to fight with you. Go home and carry on fighting. They applauded because we were stopping the meeting. When they finished their applause, I said, hang on, one more point. I said, will you work with me for 1 hour and prove me wrong, and I'll go, and don't just tell me I'm wrong. They agreed to 1 hour to prove me wrong. Now, I wanted to talk to those men with big buckles and boots and hats about love, caring, family. What do you think they would have done? Ridicule. They're all hiding behind macho bullshit. It would have been more ridicule, frankly. So how could I get them to talk about how they want their lives to be with their families? I had to think quickly on my feet. I gave each person a piece of paper from a notebook. We just tore them out. I said, I want you to be totally selfish. Think only of yourself. To hell with everybody else. I said, by the look of you, you'll all be dead within 20 years. So write on this piece of paper what you'd like to see if you could come back 100 years from now. In this community, what would you like to see? I gave them 10 minutes to do it. They did it. We got the paper back, and I still have a color slide. We put it all up on a board. Absolutely indistinguishable. You could not tell who was a farmer, who was a townsman, who was a bureaucrat. Couldn't tell the difference. Whole atmosphere changed. Within the hour, we had a holistic context. When they left, some men I saw putting an arm on other guys' shoulders. That's what it does. And yet they were fighting. Okay, it's terribly powerful to get that. So that's exciting and is likely to happen. It's this harmony. All right, so you now know what is possible with new regenerative agriculture. You know what the logjam is. You know why we didn't develop something and put a man on the moon within 70 years. You know why there can be no leadership coming from politicians or any institution. It cannot happen. You know why we're drifting leaderless, and you know that it's going to come down to us ordinary people, all right, to do something. And all we have to do is to get enough of us insisting that management be holistic and agriculture be regenerative. It's all you got to do. And when a significant number of people are saying that, it will happen, because our institutions are full of us, good people. None of them are doing this deliberately. They're all good people. I believe most people are good. Most people are doing their best. We didn't know what was causing the problem, this complex stuff. All right, so what can you personally do? You can talk, you can read, you can discuss regenerative agriculture. You can use social networking. And you can talk to the people like Judy. Where's Judy? Is she here? Yeah. Talk to people like that. They're your leaders. I'm serious. Who are the leaders in society? It's not the institutions. It's not people like me that might come up with ideas working with other scientists so we can work this out. We're not the leaders. The leaders are the people that get the information to the public. The leaders are the guy at the back with the camera recording this. The leaders are people like Judy writing books. These are the leaders that get the information out to the public. Now, do you have to convince all of the public? No, you reach a tipping point. We don't know where it is exactly, but I think I've learned a great lesson from the TED Talk. The TED Talk has gone to, next month it'll be 5 million official, individual people looking at it on the YouTube or the TED site. It'll be 5 million, all right? We know it's gone to a lot more than that already, because often 100 people look at it together. Sometimes 300 people look at it together. Sometimes 20, 30 look at it together, right? So that's gone to that. So if we say it's gone to 5 million, I know that in 20 minutes, that did more than 50 years of swimming upstream against ridicule and opposition of institutions. 20 minutes of that, by getting out to 5 million people and making sense, offering hope. Right? So if it went to 5 million, and America's got, what, 350 million odd, or whatever it is, and let's say half of them were in America, because it's gone all over the world. So if it got to 2.5 million people out of 350 million, I'm a dummy. What percentage is that? 7%. 7%? Sorry?
7%.
2.5 million out of 350 million? You're a dummy like me. It's a very small percentage. It's a very small percentage, and it's produced more change than 50 years did. So that's exciting to me, that you don't have to get to millions and millions of people. You've only got to get to a certain number when people are talking enough and our institutions can change. We've got to enable them to change. Now, everything I'm saying refers to the people working in institutions. They're working, getting salaries in institutions, but they're also human beings with families. And what I have talked to you about tonight, and what I was able to develop with Holistic Framework, please believe me, I didn't do it. I did it with the help of hundreds of people. I was the focal point, the disciplinarian, the one keeping it going, the one who was determined. But hundreds of people were helping me. They were farmers, they were ranchers, wildlifers, etc. And many of them, hundreds of them, were bureaucrats or university academic people helping me individually in defiance of their organizations. Some were sending me secret documents of what governments were doing to try to crush me. They were quietly keeping me informed so that I could counter them. These organizations are full of good people, but they cannot change it any more than we can until we enable them to change it by public perception changing. We've got to enable them to change. So if you just push two things, it would be that management needs to be holistic and agriculture needs to be regenerative. And then you can talk about that after that and explain it as well as you can, etc. I don't understand what the hell m equals nc squared is, but I accept it. You know, and the same, if people don't fully accept, but it makes sense that management shouldn't be reductionist, should be holistic, that's all you need. You don't have to give a long lecture to everybody on what that's about. Now, if you're living in a city and you are not managing farm or anything, all right, what can you do? Get involved in the whole regenerative agriculture, food, health movement. Get involved in it. Join those in that movement in your local town, your community. Support the local agriculture, anything that seems to be in line with that generic holistic context that I did intuitively. Start supporting that. I long for the situation where these now apparently 40 hubs we have, we're all locally led, locally managed, where people are just collaborating as humans now, and they come from universities. We have the first university-led hub. They come from bureaucracies, they come from farms, they're just getting together as humans. And I long for the day when a city is adopting a hub, and the city folk are going out to the hub and getting involved more. So I long for that day. So join the thousands of people that are getting into that hub movement. Even if you're a city person. Become a champion learning about it. You can get lots of materials, help from the Savory Institute website, etc. Spreading knowledge, just helping to spread the knowledge. Ignorance never blocks learning. I've been training people for years, and I've never ever seen ignorance block learning. I've only seen two things block learning: what we already know and our egos. So don't say to me, oh, you're a townsperson, you're ignorant. BS. Get going. That doesn't block learning. You've got a big advantage on somebody who's got a PhD in agriculture. You're way ahead of the game. Okay? Now, what if I'm wrong? I've talked to you tonight about a leaderless world, about what you can do, how we are the only ones that can do it, ordinary people. What if I'm wrong? What if I'm a snake oil salesman, as my critics say I am? We're screwed. You shouldn't be following me, what I'm saying. How do you know if I'm right or wrong?
To try it.
How can you know?
You have to do it.
See, you need to be cautious. So I can only say to you, this is what I know, this is what I've learned, etc. I can only say to you that if you Google my name, Savory Institute, anything, you'll find dozens, and no more than dozens, it's not hundreds, you'll find a dozen or so academics, people like Saul described, who ridicule, cite papers, etc. I can only say to you solemnly and promise you, not a single one of them has studied what I'm saying. They are all criticizing rotational grazing, cell grazing, mob grazing. Have I talked to you about grazing systems tonight? They've never even studied this stuff. And they're criticizing. It's normal behavior from institutional scientists. They're not being bad people, right? If we get criticism, we invite it. When we were training 2,000 people, we had an hour of every day was spent saying, you guys, can you find anything wrong in this? Can you find a flaw in the logic? Can you find a fault in the science? We did an hour of that in every workshop with 2,000 people over 2 years. We couldn't find flaws. We couldn't find the flaws in it. It got to the point where I ended up, and it sounds corny, but I had to do this, where I offered $1,000 reward. So we'd run a workshop with 30 scientists roughly for a week, and there'd be a $1,000 reward if anybody could find a flaw in the logic of what I've said or a flaw in the science. So when you go to the extent of offering $1,000 to people to criticize you, please believe me, you've done all you can to get people to criticize. And I do not know of a single scientist who's critical of what I'm saying. I know hundreds or dozens that are critical of what they think I'm saying. So I don't know what more to say to you there. But I can say to you, if you find a flaw, or anybody can find a flaw in what I'm saying to you tonight, I will be the first to spread it as far as I can worldwide and to drop everything we're doing and follow whatever that is. We cannot afford to go on like this. We are running out of time. Now, I'd just like to finish saying, above all, whatever you do, do not be apathetic. If you are apathetic, you're part of the problem. If you care about your children, if you care about your grandchildren, if you care about the future, you will get off your backside and get active. If you're apathetic, you're part of the problem. Because only people talking to people, talking to people, talking to people is going to save the situation. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.